What's up guys and welcome back to Monink. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Hey, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, and maybe you're just here to start Virgil's Aeneid with me, well then this is not only the video for you, this is also the channel for you. You guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. But on topic of today's video, and as you can see from the title, we're going to be going into the Aeneid, book 1. So if I could summarize the Aeneid book 1 into a one sentence, it would be that Juno gets super mad and wrecks the ships of Aeneas on the coast of Africa. Just so that you know, Juno getting mad is like a whole theme in this entire book, but in this particular chapter, since it's the opening, it's very important to know that the whole wrecking of the ships, not Aeneas' fault, is really Juno, who's queen of the gods, getting super pissed about everything, like she always does. We're pretty used to this. So why don't we just dive into the narrative to make all of that make a little bit more sense. So the book opens, the whole Aeneid opens with one of the most famous lines in all of epic poetry, and Virgil writes, "I sing of arms and of the man." This is so famous, I literally have this line tattooed on my ribcage. It is a beautiful line, beautifully written. The Latin is stunning. I have to say the Latin of this whole book is completely stunning, but again, I'm biased. Regardless, that's how the book opens, and basically Virgil just catches us up and catches his audience up of the time on who the characters are and what the situation is, right? So he explains the Trojan War to us, he explains who Aeneas is, he explains what Aeneas is now currently doing since it's after the Trojan War, and his destiny to go on to Italy to then found the future site of Rome. But Virgil does warn us. Of course he has to warn us. He warns us right now, right at the beginning. This is no easy task, okay? And the reason for that is because he is going to be thrown about the sea and thrown about land and basically tormented the entire time until he gets to Italy, because Juno, queen of the gods, and so in Greek that is Hera, she hates him. And Virgil does list a couple of reasons why, thankfully. Now there is a long list of reasons, and if I go into every single one of them, we will be here all day. But to name a few, one of the main reasons as to why she hates Aeneas is because she hated the Trojans anyways. If you guys read the Iliad with me, you will know she was never at any point on the Trojan side, and that is because Virgil reminds us of the whole judgment of Paris. I'm not going to explain what that is, but basically, very long story short, Paris, who was this Trojan guy, was given this apple and he had to give it to the most beautiful goddess, okay? In Greek mythology, he had 3 goddesses on offer to him. One of them was Aphrodite, one of them was Hera, and he decided to give it to Aphrodite over Hera, and Athena was the other option as well. But remember, these are Roman names. So he gave it to Venus as opposed to Juno, and Juno feels slighted by that still. Yeah, she holds a grudge for like a really long time. So that's one of the reasons, and then, you know, that trickled down into the rest of the Trojan War, so she didn't like any of them because of that reason, because she thought Paris can himself, the rest of them can die. Literally. The other reason is that she's super mad at Jupiter at the moment, because Jupiter had taken this youth called Ganymede, which is a whole other myth, and he took him because he like fell in love with him, thought he was super hot, and made him a cupbearer, which obviously his wife, Juno, not a fan of. And another reason, and the main reason that Virgil does harp on, is because Carthage, which is a big theme throughout this book, but Carthage is Juno's favorite city. So Carthage is currently where Virgil tells that the story is taking place, and Juno hears that Aeneas and the Trojans are not going to be nice to the queen there, right? They're not going to do Carthage any favors. And this is her favorite place. This is Juno's favorite place. And not only that, but she hears that later on in history, which Virgil's audience would know, and anybody who studies Roman history will know, Rome and Carthage, not exactly friends, to put it lightly. So Juno basically hears all of this and is very overwhelmed and has decided that she is going to make Aeneas' life a living hell. Even though it's his fate to go and like found the future site of Rome, she's like, yeah, but it doesn't have to be easy. In fact, Virgil actually ends this section in line 32. I have it written in my notes so that I wouldn't forget what line number it is, but he literally says in the Latin, "So heavy was the cost of founding the Roman race." That we know it's going to be incredibly difficult, and we know primarily it will be difficult because of Juno and because of her love for Carthage, and the fact that Aeneas is not really bringing anything good towards Carthage at any point in history. So we now get dropped into the narrative. None of that is the actual narrative. The narrative actually opens with Aeneas and his men leaving the coast of Sicily. Now, it's sunshine, it's rainbows, it's beautiful weather, the sea is calm, the men are happy, they're laughing. Like, it is a great mood when we open the book until Juno sees this, and Juno is just like, them. So what does she do? She takes all of the anger that Virgil has just described to us in the book that she's been holding on to for however many years, and she takes it to the island of Aeolia, where there is a king called Aeolus. Now, I don't know if you guys watched the Odyssey series that I did. We have met Aeolus before. He is the king of the winds, so he has control over the winds. And on Aeolia, which is his island, Aeolus, it makes sense. He keeps all of the winds prisoner beneath a mountain, basically. And so he is the one who lets them go. He gives Odysseus a bag of winds at some point during the Odyssey. So that is where Juno goes right now, and she knocks on the door of Aeolus, and she's like, Aeolus, hello, I have something to run by you. Aeolus comes to the door, lets her in, very hospitable to the queen of the gods as he should be. And Juno asks him, right, so you know how you have control over the whole wind, so I was wondering if you could just let them like all out in one go, because there are some boats down there that I don't really like, and I would appreciate it if all the winds in one go could just go on top of them and just cause, you know, like mayhem. That would actually be really great for me. So basically, not explicit in the Latin, but she says, drown them. She ends this by actually offering Aeolus, if he would do this thing for her, the most beautiful of the 14 most beautiful nymphs, that she's like, you can have her in marriage because I'm the goddess of marriage and I can make that happen, and she's really hot and you're single enough and that's all that really matters anyways. And obviously Aeolus loves this idea, right? He is just like, absolutely, I will let all of the winds go. But he does tell us that actually he would do it regardless of the marriage offer that Juno presented, because we find out that Juno actually convinced Jupiter, the king of the gods, to make Aeolus the ruler of the winds, right? I don't know why I stumbled over that, but Jupiter is the one who was influenced by Juno to really give him that power. And so therefore Aeolus feels like he's in debt to her anyways. And in saying that, he picks up a spear, he gets the end of it, and he like bangs it against the side of the mountain. So all of the winds come out in one go, and they start beelining it down to Aeneas' ships, and this is not going to go well, if you didn't already guess. So Aeneas and his men, bear in mind when we left them, they're having a great time. They're laughing, they're happy. All of a sudden, it starts kind of being more like nighttime, right? So like clouds roll in, the sea starts getting really choppy, and very, very quickly, all hell breaks loose. Like, we are talking in one corner of the sea, there is a hurricane. In the other corner of the sea, there's a whirlpool. Loads and loads of Aeneas' ships are being dragged underwater. His men are being flung about. It's complete mayhem. They are so overwhelmed that Aeneas even has a moment where he calls up to the sky and he's crying and he's screaming and he's like, oh, I wish that I had died on the plains of Troy with the likes of Hector and Sarpedon and not on the sea. As he's screaming though, and this total chaos is ensuing, you got to bear in mind that there is a god of the sea, right? And he doesn't know that anything is happening. In fact, Neptune, god of the sea, he's sitting under the water and he can kind of hear like a bubbling above him. And he's like, I didn't schedule anything for today. What's going on up there? Let me just go make sure it's okay. So he comes up to the top of the sea, and in fact, he has this little moment where he just like peeks his eyes over to just sort of survey what's going on and sees a catastrophe happening in front of him. He's like, what the is going on? He does what any angry parent would do in this moment, not that he's parent of the winds or anybody in this scene, but he looks over at the winds and he catches the eyes of the east and the west wind, and he like calls them over. He's like, get your fucking booties over here. They walk over quite guiltily, and Neptune has this moment where he just yells at them. Like, he's so mad, and he's like, what in the world gave you the kind of confidence to come to my realm? In case you've forgotten, I am the ruler of the sea. You come here without my permission, and you just decide to do whatever you want. In fact, he's so mad, he's nearly at screaming point and has to like calm himself down because he realizes that he's the one who has to clean up all of their mess. And so because of that, he calms himself down and he tells the winds basically to f off. He's like, get away from here, go back to Aeolus and let Aeolus know that he has zero jurisdiction over the sea. This is my realm. He doesn't hold a trident. I do. And therefore, if you ever want to come back here, you better ask my permission. And the winds are very good in this moment, and they just leave. So Poseidon can have the time to clean up the sea. Everything is calm. Bear in mind Aeneas and his men on the boats. They just went from sunshine and rainbows to a total storm in the middle of nowhere to then having rainbows and sunshine again. And they are frazzled by this. Okay, the men are just like, why don't we just sail to land? That sounds like a better idea than staying out here. So they all decide to sail to the nearest land, which happens to be the coast of Libya. And all of the men are thrilled to be on dry land. In fact, they like collapse on the sand. They are just thrilled to be there. And in fact, a lot of the men start bringing all of the corn off of the boats, and they say that this corn is from Ceres, who's Demeter in Greece, so she's the goddess of harvest and all this. They got it from the goddess, not directly. I mean that, like, you know, they farmed it and all of this. So they have this corn. This other guy then starts building a fire so that they can like grill the corn. And Aeneas does what a good leader would do in this moment, and he goes up to a vantage point. He just like climbs up on a rock to see if there are any more boats on the horizon. Obviously, there are none of them. They're the only men who survived. So he thinks, we'll come back to that later. Anyways, he's up there, realizes there are no boats on the horizon. And so he starts looking on the land to sort of see, you know, where they are. And he spots 3 stags beneath him. And behind these 3 stags are loads of deer. And he's thinking, amazing, food. So he comes down from the vantage point, and he goes over to shoot them with his arrow, and a bunch of other men go over to help him. They're all thrilled. They then start grilling up all the meat. They make all the offerings appropriate to the various goddesses and all of this and gods. I'm not going to get into all of that detail because, again, here all day. But when it comes to the end of the feast, all of the men are sitting around, and they start to remember all of the men that they've lost and all of the misfortune that they have dealt with. And they start to cry and get really upset. And, you know, they're just sitting on the beach as night is rolling in being like, our life really sucks. Our viewpoint then switches to that of Zeus, and he's watching this happen from the heavens, and he's looking down on his beloved Trojans on the coast of Libya, and he feels so much pity for them. Like, he feels so bad that these men are having to go through that. Now, before he can come up with any sort of idea on his own of how to help them, Venus, or the goddess of love, Venus, she walks into the scene and she's crying herself. She's bawling her eyes out. She looks at her dad and she's just like, what in the world do the Trojans have to do to catch a break? Is Italy even worth all this pain? That's my son, that's your grandson down there who's leading these people. He's incredibly pious. They've done nothing but be loyal to you and honor all the gods, and all because your wife, or because Juno doesn't like them. We're supposed to sit around and watch our family suffer like this? Is that fair? And you know what? She's got some points there, I have to say. Jupiter has a really good response to her, that he actually has a really paternal moment, and he hugs her and he reassures her. He tells her that he understands why she's so anxious about this. He tells her that he totally gets where she's coming from as a mother, and he says, in order to calm her down, that actually, even though Juno does clearly hate Aeneas and clearly hates the Trojans, she's not hiding that from anybody, okay? Despite that, she cannot actually stop fate, and it is their fate to go and found the future site of Rome. It is their fate to reach Italy. So no matter what she does, she can't stop that from happening, and therefore Venus should be a little bit more calmed by that. No matter what happens to Aeneas, he will fulfill his destiny. And then he decides to tell Venus the whole history of Rome. I kid you not, like, goes through so much history to be like, just in case you were worried, let me tell you everything that Aeneas is going to start and then snowball until it gets to Virgil's modern day. And it is a lot, it is a big chunk, you guys. I'll explain the first part though, because just like, why not, we're here. First part is that he tells Venus that Aeneas will eventually get to Latium, which is sort of on the coast of Italy, and that is where he will rule. He will then hand over his rule to his son, Ascanius, who is also in the story. We'll get to him in a hot second. But Ascanius will then be handed over the power, but not of Latium. He will then rule over this place called Alba Longa. Then in Alba Longa, for 300 years, the bloodlines of the Trojans will rule. So they're gonna rule there, and then after 300 years, Mars, who is Ares in Greece, so the god of war, he is going to decide that he's a little horny one day, and he's going to impregnate a priestess who has no business being pregnant, let alone having sex. So he's going to impregnate her, and she is going to birth 2 twins. If you don't know who those 2 twins are, it's Romulus and Remus. Yes, this is written in this chapter of the book. It's long. He then explains the whole Romulus and Remus thing, and then goes into the founding of Rome, and then goes into the history from that point up until Virgil's modern day. And then Jupiter looks at Venus and goes, see, rest assured, all of that's gonna happen, so don't even worry. And Venus is still crying, and she's just like, okay, Dad, I trust you. Was she listening? We don't know. I was barely listening by the end of it, but either way, that's what she says. Jupiter clearly is not as confident as he made himself out to be, because as he's cuddling Venus and being like, it's okay, I love you, all of this, blah, blah, he turns around and he looks at Mercury and gives him these like eyeballs and is like, you know, telling him to go and do something without verbally telling him. So Mercury gets the signals and is just like, okay. And he runs down to Carthage. He runs down to where Dido is, who's the queen of Carthage, and he sprinkles. He doesn't stop, but he sort of like walks, well, I guess flies by and sprinkles all of this like sympathy and love over her so that she will kindly receive the Trojans into Carthage and into their new budding city so that they can, you know, recuperate before leaving. But clearly Jupiter wasn't confident that that was going to happen, and so it's just like, I'm gonna try and help a little. Mercury then leaves and our narrative cuts back to Aeneas on the shore. So when we cut back to Aeneas, it's now the next morning and he is waking up. He hasn't slept a lot. Virgil lets us know that he was tossing and turning all night. He's got lots of anxiety. Obviously, who wouldn't in his situation? So he wakes up super early and he wakes up his mate Achates. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's said like this. Well, it's spelt like this even. So that is Achates' name. I'm going to call him Achates for this entire series. If I'm pronouncing him incorrectly, let me know in the comments. You guys know that I love it when you guys correct me. So Aeneas wakes up Achates and they decide that they are going to go and survey the land to see who the people are who live there and to see if it's safe to stay there, to see if they are welcome there, all this, that, and the other. And so they armor themselves up, they pick up a spear, and they walk off from the beach and into the wood that is just behind the beach. And when they're walking through the wood, Venus decides to come down and to disguise herself as a Spartan warrior girl. So she disguises herself as the Spartan and has acted as if she's been hunting through the forest. So when the men come across her, she turns around and she's just like, oh, people, great. Hello, men. I've been wandering around with my sister. We were hunting this boar. I seem to have lost her. Have you seen her? She's dressed just like me. Obviously, Aeneas and Achates have no clue what she's talking about because she's lying through her teeth. But Aeneas sees his opportunity and he turns to her and he says, no, I have not seen your sister. I'm very sorry. However, you are so beautiful. I have a hard time believing that you are immortal. You must be a goddess. Maybe Diana? If not, possibly just a nymph. Either way, you're so beautiful and I need your help. So if you would like to tell us where we are, we have no idea. We're just strangers. We're travelers. Maybe you could tell us where we are if these people here are nice. And because you're so beautiful, because you are clearly divine, we will honor you with sacrifices, with pouring out libations, and all of this if you will help us out. Obviously, if you guys didn't get it, he's just trying to flatter her because he needs all of her help. And so Venus turns around. He, again, unknowing it's Venus in disguise, turns around and she says, oh, silly, I don't need any of that. I'm just obviously a mortal girl. But since you are so nicely and since you flattered me, I will of course tell you where you are. So she goes into this long speech about where he is and about who the people are, which I'm only going to explain a chunk of it to you because there's only a chunk that's really that important for the summary. If you need the whole speech, just go read it in the book. So Venus begins her speech by telling Aeneas that the people there are actually Phoenicians who have been kicked out of their land or left their land, and they have come to find a new town, to found a new city in a new home of Libya. And so she even points to her boots, which are purple, which is like a whole thing for Phoenicians, that they have all this purple stuff. So she's like, look, my boots are purple, therefore I'm Phoenician, trust me. And she goes on to explain that the person who led them all there is this woman called Dido, and she explains Dido's up past. Honestly, Dido, out of all the characters in this book, cannot catch a break. So Dido's history is that Dido was a princess of Tyre, okay, which is a great city, right, in Phoenicia. Her dad then marries her off to this guy called Sychaeus. I'm not sure if you pronounce it Sychaeus, but that's always how I've said it. So again, we're going to go with that pronunciation. This is how you spell it. So her dad marries her off to this guy called Sychaeus, and Sychaeus is a really great guy. Like, he's a really nice man. Dido falls madly in love with him. Unfortunately, even though Sychaeus is a great guy, her brother, like Dido's brother, who's this guy called Pygmalion, yeah, he's a head. Like, he is known for being a terrible criminal. That's literally what Venus says in the Latin. She's just like, well, this isn't good and the story isn't going to go well because her brother, problematic. Very long story short, again, I'm summarizing the crap out of this for you. Very long story short, though, that Dido's brother Pygmalion ends up getting into a bit of a tiff with Sychaeus, and he ends up killing Sychaeus. But he doesn't want to tell Dido for obvious reasons, because he's like, well, I just kind of killed my sister's husband, so that's kind of... Instead, he hides it from Dido, completely hides it, like doesn't even tell Dido that Sychaeus is dead. And so one night, Sychaeus' ghost, because the idiot Pygmalion didn't decide to bury him. Why, I don't know. But anyway, so Sychaeus' ghost appears to Dido and is just like, hey, I'm a ghost now. I died. It's really not safe that you're here by yourself. Your brother is a problem. The kingdom isn't safe. Here's the plan. He instructs her that he has buried, which is a very normal thing in the ancient world, by the way, he's buried a bunch of money and also silver and gold in the ground. And he tells Dido where he's hidden it, and he says, go there, pick it all up, and leave. Like, just get on a boat and leave. She listens to him, she goes to find all this stuff, and on her way to the boats, she finds a bunch of people who support her and who are on her side and who don't like her brother either. And so they then all get back in the boat. Well, they get into a boat, not back in the boat. They get in the boat and they all just leave, right? They all leave together and they go to Libya. They end up on the shores of Libya and they decide to build a new city there. And that is currently where Aeneas is. So that is the whole thing that Venus tells him, being like, this is how we got here and this is why the people are here and blah, blah, and this is why we love Dido. But she then ends this little speech by asking Aeneas who he is and what brought him to these shores. Now, Aeneas replies in like the most Aeneas way ever. He just gives out a great sigh. And you're reading it like, I mean, just tell her. Like, I don't know why you gotta be dramatic on top of that. Just tell her the story. So he does, luckily, after his great elongated sigh and he's like, oh, the misfortunes of Troy. Aeneas has a little dramatic moment and then obviously he does actually continue to explain how they managed to get there. So he explains the whole sea incident. He doesn't explain the whole like from Troy here. He just the immediate issue of how they actually got onto the shores. He explains that to Venus in disguise and he ends it by saying, we must be hated by some kind of god because there is no logical reason for all of the hardships that we have faced. Is basically the sentiment of what he says in this little speech. And Venus actually interrupts him. She cuts him off and she says, no. If you were hated by someone, you wouldn't be standing here, you wouldn't be speaking to me. So really, I wouldn't worry about that. You're not hated, or at least maybe you are, but you're at least protected by someone. She then tells him that she is trained in reading bird signs, and she opens up this very famous scene to us all, well, to us all classicists. She introduces us to this very famous image of these swans that are all sort of, you know, hanging out together. Is that what swans do? They hang out? Whatever. They're all together, and this eagle actually flies right in the middle of them. So naturally, all of the swans scatter. Now, when the eagle disappears, after a little bit of waiting, when they realize that there is no threat, all the swans come back together to hang out again, right? To chit chat, whatever it is that swans do. And Venus in disguise used this as an example to Aeneas by saying that his men are basically the swans, that obviously there was an issue. The eagle is now the sea in the real world. So she says, because of that, you've all dispersed, but much like the swans, you will all come back together. So have faith in that, okay? Do not worry. This will happen. It's fate. It's a bird sign, right? That in the ancient Roman world, very, very important. Before Aeneas can even reply, Venus in disguise turns around and starts walking away. Now, he obviously turns to the side, realizes that this girl isn't there, but has a question. So turns around to see where she's walked off into the woods. And as he turns around, he can see that her dress is getting longer. Her hair is getting longer. Suddenly, the air is filled with the smell of ambrosia, and he realizes he's been speaking to his mother. And instead of having the response that we would assume a son would have towards their parent, maybe like, oh my god, mom, what? Like, hi, hello, mom, I love you. None of that. In fact, Aeneas, it's a really touching moment. Aeneas calls after her and says, why do you mock me like this? Why wouldn't you just tell me that you're my mom? Why don't you want to hug me? Why don't you want to hold my hand? Seriously, is there there's nothing in you that wants to do any of that to your son? And honestly, I don't have any moments like this for Aeneas where I'm like, you know what, I feel a lot of sympathy for him. But in this moment when he's calling after Venus, I feel a lot of sympathy towards that man, because all he's doing is asking for some kind of attention and some kind of affection from her, and she doesn't even bat an eye. Like, literally doesn't turn around, doesn't bat an eye, just continues into the forest. One part of this conversation that I didn't mention explicitly was that Venus had told them that they should walk down to the town and talk to Dido themselves, because she's really lovely and she will probably help them out if they just go and approach her. So because she's walked off, they decide, Aeneas and Achates, decide that they should just go and do that. They have literally no other options, so they're like, well, let's start walking towards the town. As they're walking, Venus does do them a solid and covers them in a mist, and that way no one is going to stop them and talk to them, because no one can see them. We've seen this happen in the Odyssey a bunch of times with Athena and Odysseus. It's now happening to Aeneas and to Achates. They're walking through what I keep calling as Carthage. Let's just make a little note here that in the book, it's not noted as Carthage, it's just a new tire, but because of the Roman history with Carthage, that's why I'm calling it Carthage, because it will become Carthage. So they're walking through the foundation of Carthage, and there is a very, very long description of literally down to the bricks. Like, Virgil does not spare us any details in regards to the people who are putting the bricks down, the people who are watching this happen, you know, the brick material itself. Like, we hear it all. Obviously, I'm not going to relay everything to you. We'll be here for a while if I do. But the most important part of this whole walk is that they end up through the town and stumbling upon this temple to Juno, which is still, it's not fully built, but it's pretty much built. So they walk in to go and explore because, again, they're in a new place. They're trying to find the queen. They're just like, oh, a temple. Stumble into the temple and they start seeing all of these votive offerings on the ground. Obviously, great thing to see in a temple, especially one to Juno. Everyone should be terrified of Juno. Aeneas doesn't know that Juno is the one that hates him at this moment, by the way. That's kind of important. Anyways, both of them are looking around on the walls. They're being nosy. They're looking at all of the art. And Aeneas starts to realize that the art on the wall is actually depicting the Trojan War. So he has this moment where they're seeing, both of them, both he and Achates, are seeing, you know, Priam depicted. They're seeing the Amazons. They're seeing Achilles. They're seeing all of these men that they know. And even Aeneas at one point sees himself, which must have been a very strange experience. He sees himself and he looks over at Achates and he screams up to the heavens. He's like, is there anyone on this earth that doesn't know about our misfortunes? Which, again, this is another point that I feel for Aeneas in this moment. Regardless though, they're walking around, they're looking at all these images, they're getting quite emotional about them as well. Because remember, this hasn't happened that long ago. So they're seeing all of these images and they start to hear people coming up the steps. So obviously both of them are a bit like, we should definitely hang back because they're not aware that they're covered by this whole mist. So they hang back into the shadows and in walks Dido. And Dido, the queen, is surrounded by all of her guards, all of these men who are protecting her. She goes to sit in front of all of these men as the queen. She sits in front of them and the men scatter around them. And then right from the staircase coming into the temple walks in 3 lead Trojans. So Aeneas immediately recognizes them from the other ships who have obviously, they thought at least, gone down. So these 3 men walk in and they are then followed themselves by a bunch of other Trojans. I'm smiling because it's a moment in the book where you're like, hey, this one thing, it's all coming back. The men walk in and they approach Dido, and the lead Trojan in this scene, bear in mind, Aeneas really wants to jump out and hug him in this moment, but they decide to stay back because they want to see if the fates will allow them to even get a little bit far with Dido. Basically, they're using them as bait for Dido. If this goes well, they're going to come out of the shadows. If not, they're going to skedaddle. The lead Trojan comes forward and approaches Dido and explains the situation that they are now in and asks permission to stay on the shore of Libya with her permission. Again, that is very, very clear. There is no disrespect in this scene towards the queen. They are being very, very polite in asking Dido to stay on the shore and not just doing it. They also explain to us now, and they explain to Dido that they are led by Aeneas, that Aeneas is the one who's actually leading them on this great journey that they're going to go and try and be on Italy. However, if he doesn't reappear, because remember, they think that he's been lost at sea as well. If he doesn't reappear, the plan B is that they will just go back to Sicily once their boats are repaired on the shores of Libya. They'll just go back to Sicily and serve the king there. So he's assuring her that they are just using the shore to repair the boats, then they will be out of her hair, and they have plan A and plan B depending on if Aeneas, the great Aeneas, who has this great fame, is going to come back or not. Dido, in response, is more than happy to accommodate them. She's incredibly hospitable back to them, says, of course you can stay just to repair your boats, no problem. Of course I've heard of the Trojans. Of course I've heard of the Trojan War. We've had it sung to us hundreds and hundreds of times. The fame of Aeneas. Aeneas is this great guy, so I've heard from the stories. Literally just starts gassing him up, and Aeneas, bear in mind, is in the corner, and he is loving it. To the point where Venus actually lifts the mist from him and Achates in this moment and does him a solid by making him way more attractive than he actually is. The glistening eyes, the glowing skin, he's taller, he's well fit in this moment, and he comes out of the shadows and he's like, I am the Aeneas that you speak of. The drama is thick in this book with Aeneas. He has this big entrance, he goes up to the men, the other Trojans, and he like clasps their hands, which is really funny as a response because in Homer, these men would have been bawling their eyes out, they would have been hugging each other, kissing each other's cheeks. In the Roman writing, they just clutch each other's hands like a handshake, and I'm like, really? You guys thought each other was dead and that's the response? But anyways, that is the response, and Dido is watching this happening, and again, Aeneas just sort of reiterates everything, saying, you know, I too have my ships on the shore, we would love to also park our ships here and repair them so that we can continue on to go to Italy. And Dido's response is wonderful, actually. She starts off by saying, are you really Aeneas, who's son of Venus and all of this? You know, she again continues to gas him up a little bit, but then her response, which is a line, this is one of my favorite lines I've ever written, and it's line 630. I did have to write that down so I wouldn't forget it. But she says in Latin that she is learning how to help people who are suffering because of her own suffering. So basically she gives everybody permission and she says, yeah, you can totally stay on the shore. It's no problem. My city is your city. She literally says that line as well. The men are thrilled about this. And so Aeneas turns to Achates and he asks him to go back down to the ships where they've parked to tell the men, one, that they are welcome there and that they are totally safe and it's not a problem. Two, to pick up his son Ascanius. And three, to pick up gifts to give to Dido. So he goes through a whole list of all these things that they can give Dido. Again, I'm not going to be going into that much detail. It's in the book if you need them. Achates is more than happy to do that. Dido then leads the other men and tells Achates to come and join them in the palace, where they're then going to have a feast, a welcome feast. This is very hospitable, totally normal stuff to do. So as Achates moves down to the ships and as Aeneas and Dido and all of them go to the palace, we then cut to Venus, who, unfortunately, I understand half of her mentality here, only half of it. The other half, I'm like, why? So she's sitting around and she's watching this happening and she is terrified. This is the part that I understand. She's terrified that Juno is going to come and get involved and she is going to influence Dido to basically go back on her word or to make Aeneas and the Trojans' life miserable, like all over again, which is a genuine possibility. Okay, so we're not going to take that away from Venus right now. However, the way that she wants to deal with it is like probably not the best. She turns to her son Cupid. If you know anything about mythology, anytime Venus asks Cupid, her son, to do anything, he just says, okay, and this is no exception. She turns to him and she says, hey, I've got this great idea. You're gonna take on the form of Ascanius. Immediately, you're like, this is probably not gonna go well. You're gonna take on the form of Ascanius, and what you're gonna do is you're going to make Dido basically love you as like this little boy, you know, like she's gonna be totally enamored by you, so much that she wants to pick you up and like put you on her knee or whatever it is, so that you can get close enough to her chest, like her heart. And once you're close to her heart, you're going to sprinkle all this love into her heart. And that way, no matter what Juno does, she doesn't want to, Dido won't want to go against Aeneas and won't want to go against the love that she has for Ascanius either. This is where we get the first description of Dido being doomed, because it really doesn't get any better from here, okay? It's only downhill from this point until book 4. It's rough. If you like Dido, don't get attached. That's my only advice. She then does explain that she's going to go and pick up Ascanius and keep him safe, put him in like some sort of hibernation mode, keep him safe in another temple. So she goes and she does that. And Cupid steps in to take on the disguise of Ascanius. So Achates goes to pick up Ascanius, picks up Cupid, brings him back to the palace. As he's back on this whole journey, and he's bringing obviously the gifts for Dido as well, Dido sends down a bunch of flocks and a bunch of food for the men on the beach to give them a little, you know, a feast of their own. But obviously they can't all fit in the palace. There's far too many of them. So it's just her way of saying, you know, you're welcome. Here is everything that you would need to survive for like a year. Like literally, it's a crazy amount of food that she sends down. So they're all eating comfortably. And then Ascanius and Achates go back to the palace and they have this massive feast. I'm talking like, we get lots of details about everything, about all the food. We get details about the entertainment. It sounds like a right party. And Ascanius / Cupid and all of the men actually having a great time, okay? They're having a fantastic time. And in fact, the Carthaginians, well, again, the new Tyrian people, they are actually honoring all the gods. Like, there's a whole list of how they pour out libations to Bacchus, they pour out libations to Jupiter. They honor them perfectly. Now, this party is going so well that actually Cupid is doing an incredible job of being Ascanius, to the point where Dido is basically putty in his little teeny tiny chubby baby boy hands. Literally, Dido is fussing over him the whole time. She picks him up at one point, which is exactly what Venus wanted her to do, and puts him on her lap so he can turn around and put all of this love into her heart, which means that she is completely enamored by Aeneas. She's completely in love, obviously not in a romantic way, with Ascanius, like loves him like her own son. She's just so happy in this moment. Now, when the feast is done and everyone is calming down, now if you guys are familiar with Homeric works, would be the time that a guest is now going to entertain all of the locals with stories of their travels. So Dido turns to Aeneas, and the book ends with her saying to him, I know that the whole Troy thing is a little bit of a topic that we probably shouldn't get into. I get that it's probably a little bit sensitive. So even though I do want to hear about how Achilles was, I do want to hear about Hector, I do want to hear about Priam, my main question to you, and the big thing that we really want to know here, is how in the world did you get from Troy to the coast of Africa? Because it's been 7 years since the war ended. So now is the time when we get a timeline for the war. We get a timeline for Aeneas, and the book ends with him taking a deep breath in. And you guys, we were about to get slapped into a flashback. My body is ready. I hope you're ready, because I am hype to hear about Aeneas' travels as soon as he leaves the burning city of Troy. But that is where book 1 ends. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. If you guys do not know how to support the channel, I get a lot of emails from you guys being like, how can we help? There is a donation link in the description below. Anything, no matter how little, would be appreciated for me, and obviously with my time and everything like that. You obviously don't have to do that. You can just hit the subscribe button. That also works as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode, and I will be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moaning. We'll be seeing you with book 2 next week, so I'll see you then.